Good morning. Good morning. It's Monday morning, 10 a.m. on July the 18th, 2016. My name is Paul Merrill. I'm from Beaufort Fairmont Automated Testing Services. And our goal at Beaufort Fairmont is to rid the world of bad code. And we do that through automated testing. We have several services that we offer along with that. One is consulting to help you through the challenges of your automated testing, whether it's in an agile testing environment or one that's trying to become more agile or a more traditional environment. We work with training so we can help people get their skills up to date a little bit. And we also do project work, which is, if you actually need someone to come in and take care of needs specific to your automated testing. This is one of my first webinars. As we go along here, there are a couple things that I want to point out. If you have a question, please raise your hand and I'll be able to see that in my attendees menu. If you see me looking off to the right over here, to my right, to your left, that's because I have another screen with the control menu on it from GoToWebinar, and it's a little bit complicated, so forgive me if you see me looking over there a little bit more than you would think I would need. Hopefully we're all focused on the content though. As I go through this webinar, I'm totally open to questions, and I would love to hear your thoughts, your concerns. Your problems may be similar to other people's problems, so it would be terrific if you would share them. The way that you can do that is by raising your hand, and GoToWebinar has a way to raise your hand in here. I'm not sure exactly what your control board looks like, but hopefully your application shows very similar to mine, and you can very easily raise your hand. I will try to be aware of that, but there's a lot going on in this GoToWebinar control panel, so forgive me if I don't see it right away. I'll try to take normal periodic breaks as I go through to check in and see if we have any questions as well, and give a break for that. A lot of you came across, also you're all on mute right now, and I will unmute you when you have a question. I'm doing that because it makes for better sound quality, and hopefully you can all hear me. I would like to just try out the raising hand thing. So if you wouldn't mind, please raise your hand now, and then and I'll be able to see, and we'll all be able to make sure that works. This also gives us a little bit of time as we get started for latecomers. Great, great. So when we have actual questions as we go along, please raise your hand. Once I recognize you, please, if you wouldn't mind, give us your name, your role, and the company that you come from, if you wouldn't mind. Most of you all I met or got or connected with through the Triagile conference a couple weeks ago here in Raleigh. I'm actually in Cary, and our company is in Cary. But we met in Raleigh, and it was a really terrific conference there. This talk went off better than I expected. There wasn't enough room for people to get into the room, and even though we had people sitting in front and in the aisles and alongside and everything else, I was quite honored by that, and I really appreciate the interest and the attendance. So, since we're a couple minutes into this, let's go ahead and get started. Once again, my name is Paul Merrill, and this is my Twitter handle. If you want to sync up on Twitter, there's a lot of ways to get in touch with me. I've got a handout here. You're welcome to download now or at any time. Hopefully you can download that. I haven't tried that functionality out before until now. It's called Syncing Up Testing-References.pdf, and that file is going to have the references that I used in this talk. I did a lot more research than the references here, but these are the references that I actually used. It's also got references to the tools that we're going to talk about. So let's get started. It's usually a good idea for you to know who it is you're speaking with. So a little bit about me. Back in 2002, I worked with my first Agile team. This was an extreme programming team in a retail store, a company that had retail stores down in Texas. I'm now in Cary, North Carolina, but that was down in San Antonio, Texas at the time. And it was really a very, very positive experience. It was one of the first times that I had seen a team pull together where we crossed over roles and learned from each other. We tried to share in the outcome of the project. And we put together a really good piece of software, to tell you the truth. Each week or each iteration, we had working code, and that's something we'll talk about in this presentation. A few of the numbers, I've been doing this for over 16 years, a lot of different teams, a lot of different code bases. The roles that I've played are pretty much all of them at the first few levels within technology. The industries have been various: banking, reinsurance, and quite a few others, even some security in there. We had a client that did enterprise level security, which was a very fun project, and I learned a lot through. So a few of the things that we're going to go through. Number one, I want to make sure that if you guys walk away with anything from this, you're going to walk away with knowledge of the fact that it is possible to sync up agile testing and development within an iteration of your agile projects. That's the number one thing. If you walk away with nothing else, that's what I'm hoping you walk away with. Number two, I'm hoping you'll walk away with one way to do this, and that's called from the inside out. As we go through this, we're going to have, this is kind of an overview here of our agenda. We'll start out talking about what the problem is and what it looks like. We'll go into what it means to test from the inside out. And finally, we'll talk about how do we know when things are getting better. One of the places to start with Agile is the Agile Manifesto. That's the point that I tend to come back to again and again. And if you haven't seen this, it's available at agilemanifesto.org. I also have the link to it in the handout that I have here available for you. But this is what it looks like. And back in 2001, actually, I think it was the late 90s when folks started working together on what it meant to be agile and what agile methodologies were. And basically it says we are uncovering better ways of developing software by doing it and helping others do it. Through this work, we've come to value individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, responding to change over following a plan. That is, while there's value in the items on the right, we value the items on the left more. And you have the original signatories here. Anybody can go out and sign it now on agilemanifesto.com and be one of the new signatories. During this presentation, I want to focus on one particular aspect of this, which is working software over comprehensive documentation. And that's really the end goal that we have here. I had to make a few assumptions in putting together this presentation, and I hope you'll go along with them. If you'd like to debate them, I'm more than open to that, but please hold it till the end of the conversation. That particular debate, please hold it to the end of the conversation, as it's fundamental to talking through this. You just have to make certain assumptions to have a conversation. These are some of the more obvious ones that I made. We want to deliver working code is the first assumption. The second is working code depends on testing. So, working software, you know, I want to talk about that just briefly. I can't tell you how many teams I've walked into and worked with where we get into a demo and the code is not working. And it's always surprising to me, although I understand that it is common, and it is certainly something that happens again and again. Maybe it happens on your team, and we'll talk a little bit about that, as it's one of the signs that we have some issues with testing not syncing up with development. You might have a problem. So I have a friend who helps me out with some graphics, and this is one of the ones that she put together for me, and I think it's pretty interesting. And it happens at a lot of different companies. Maybe you've seen this. During the first iteration or sprint, developers are coding. Testers don't have much to do. There's no UI for the particular features or whatever. And what we do is in iteration 2, we bring those testers online, and they find issues and they interrupt the developer with that. So you have context shifting for the developers. They have to go back and think about what they did during iteration 1 and pull up that context again. And that takes a lot of time, especially when many bugs are found during this iteration 2, and the features that were set up to have been worked on during iteration 2 don't get done because instead developers are working on their bugs. Iteration 3, you've got a bunch of testing going on, and maybe now the developer can take a break. Here's another example of what can happen. Maybe you do a whole bunch of development for several iterations and your testers are just off doing whatever, playing video games or something. Finally, the tester gets to do some work in iterations 4 and possibly 5, and now we just don't even know what happened in iteration 5 because we haven't been working together. So let's talk about when we might have a problem, and I'd like to get your thoughts on this. These are a few of the ones that I see a lot with my clients. Number one, add-on testing iterations. So we have these expected planned iterations that get added on to a project, and we may have in fact 3 iterations of development, and then we'll have this 4th one that is a testing iteration. And look, if that's what we have to do, that's what we have to do. But why aren't we doing the testing before? What is the problem or constraint that's keeping us from having testing happen at the same time as development? We're going to talk through that. Work items don't work, and when you're in your demo, you see more docs and slides than you see working code. Well, that could show that you have a problem. After all, we're after working code at the end of each iteration. And one of the refrains that I hear quite a bit is testers can't keep up. I hear that a lot. And it's interesting to me because one of the hallmarks of Agile, especially Scrum and XP, is that the team is empowered and that the team results are what matters. If we're naming one particular piece of the team and applying blame or responsibility to them to the exclusion of others or from others, we have a problem where we don't really have a team and the team does not have the same goals. And it is those goals that make this work. Each member on the team has to have the goal of working code coming out of an iteration, and each one of them has to believe that they can produce that working code together. So really it's not that testers can't keep up, it's that testing didn't keep up. We weren't able to keep that up, not just the testers. Any questions? I'd like to hear your thoughts on this and what it is that you see, the problems that you see on this. Please raise your hand if you have a question, and I'll give more time as we go on. Great. Okay, no questions. So how do we get working code? Well, this is exactly what we want to get into. So let's talk about this technique from the inside out. And I want to talk about what that is and get into a little bit of detail here. In August, I'm going to get into more technical detail in the webinar then, so make sure to sign up for that if you are a highly technical person. Or send your technical people. We'd love for them to come and join us and talk through the technique, the actual technology of this. Today we're going to give kind of a high-level view of it, and we'll get more in depth in August 2016. But in order to understand things, we need a reference point. And today, the reference point that let's find a place to start in talking through this. So what I've done is I've created this abstraction of an application, and the outermost box here, the actual line around it is the containing application. It is the system under test, the piece of code that you're writing for your customer. And on the outside of it, we have a user interface. We may have endpoints there, but in this example, I'm having a user interface. We have controllers probably that calls into, and then the business logic that calls into, and the data model. Deep down, business logic calls into to modify it. And usually when we're testing these, we do what we call black box testing. Black box testing means that this box on the outside, this application, is dark. We can't see anything in it. We don't know what's going on in there. It is not transparent at all. It's something that we cannot see into, and we don't know what's going on. Most testers are this way. Most manual testers test applications this way. There are a couple issues with that. The first issue is until the user interface is there, we can't test any other piece of the application. However, the user interface may be the minority of the code involved in this application. It may not be, but usually it's one piece. I think we can all attest to that. Another way to do testing is called white box testing, or being able to see in and look at the application and work with it, get our hands dirty inside the internals of the application testing it. And that's basically what inside out is that we're going to start on the inside part of the application and work our way out. In this case that I've got drawn up here, we are working from the data model out, through the business logic, through the controllers, and out to the interface. Another way to look at that might be this, where we test the business logic and work our way out to the other components of the application. How do we do that? Any questions about these first as I go forward? Please just raise your hand if you have a question, and I will mute your mic. I will unmute your mic. That would be more helpful, right? Once again, when you have a question, I'd love to know the company that you come from, your name, and your role there, so that we have a little bit of context about where your question comes. All right, no questions at this point. Let's keep going. So how do we do that? Well, we can use a test driver, and some of the more popular test drivers you've heard of. How many people have heard of these? Cucumber tends to have a bigger part of the market share. Each of the three of these are open source and available freely. We can do training in each one of these, by the way, and project work in these as well. But these are test drivers, and basically what they are is they give you a human readable test case. Here in the United States, these are usually in English, so you have very easily readable test cases in English that anyone, whether they are technical or not, can read through and have an idea of what it is we're verifying or checking in the application or testing. Cucumber has the market share. Robot Framework is a very good one as well. Those are both keyword-driven tools that can do data-driven development, data-driven testing as well. Gauge is much the same way. It has features of keyword-driven development testing as well as data-driven testing. Gauge is pretty new. It's from ThoughtWorks, and it's open source, and I'm looking forward to using that more often in my projects because I think it's going to be terrific. ThoughtWorks does some really, really great work. One of their principal engineers is one of the original signatories of the manifesto we just talked about, the Agile Manifesto. That's Mark Fowler. And you may know ThoughtWorks as one of the main developer for Selenium came from ThoughtWorks, as well as Appium and some of these other really great tools. He also developed Sauce Labs, and I believe he's the founder of Sauce Labs at this point. So how do we use a test driver? Well, let's look at this. We talked about how they're human readable, but a test driver might tie in to a specific component of the application, and the way that it does that is through publicly exposed interfaces. These publicly exposed methods, we tie into them through language bindings for these tools, and so most of these tools have multiple language bindings. Ruby was originally developed with, Cucumber was originally developed with Ruby, but it now has bindings in a number of different languages. Robot Framework has bindings in Python and Java and several other languages. I believe even in the .NET world. Actually, I know that's true. Git has bindings in different languages as well. So there's a lot of different opportunity in using these. And where we want to get is that we're enabling testers and making it so that they can test things prior to a user interface being developed. And think for a moment about the power of that. If you're a tester and you've only been able to interact with an application through the user interface, first of all, you have to wait for the user interface to be developed. And that's not always the first thing to be developed. If it is first before the other components of the application, it's not going to work. So really they have to wait for the full spectrum of the application, or one particular slice of the application we call a feature or story, to be created. So that's one of the big reasons that we end up with test cases being written after the application is written, and where we have these follow-on iterations and we have testing out of sync with development. That's what we want to work through here today. So imagine that you have a developer, or that you sit down at the planning stage for your iteration and you say, okay, we know that we're going to, let's say that we're a retail application, and for this retail application we want the new feature of being able to create a sale in the system and use the sale to discount items. And the idea of the sale is basically that it has a start date, an end date, and a sale price. Okay. So you don't, if you don't need a UI for this, what are some of the things you could do? Imagine writing up test cases that are easily readable, that did things like created a sale and made sure that the sale existed. Create a sale and make sure that the sale price happens for a date between the start and end date. For a sale, make sure that the original price is the same price prior to the start date as prior to the start date. Also make sure that the original price is the same after the end date. Make sure that the start date cannot follow the end date. Make sure that the start date and end date are valid dates. I could go on and on and on with this. Make sure that when you purchase an item, you get the sales price during the sale period. What happens with daylight savings time that we're currently going through in the United States? I don't know how many other countries go through that, but I know that some don't. When the time changes, doesn't work right. How do we record that in the system? So that might be just the business logic and going through, does this actually work for what we want it to work for? Next, we might take those same test cases and run them again against the business logic layer, but now we might want to verify inside the data model that we get something working. So think of what this means. This means that we only have to, in the first case, we only have to have the business logic written in order for a test case to execute and pass. But that doesn't mean necessarily that we have to write the test cases after the business logic is there, provided the people writing the glue code between the test case, the test driver, and the business logic know what the interface is going to look like. We can actually write the code, the glue code, for the test driver and the test cases prior to the business logic ever being written. Or we could write it right in parallel. This does a lot of great things for the developer. One of the things that it does for the developer is that it allows them to test their own assumptions. It gives them another set of eyes and a persistent test case to go through specific routes in the code. It allows them to troubleshoot bugs, to know what the bugs are much earlier while they're working on that particular bit of code. It allows them to not have to context shift as much. They can go in and make one test case pass. They can go in and make a second test case pass. They can go in and try to make a third pass and see that the first doesn't pass anymore, and know that the last change that they made is exactly what broke the system. So there are a lot of benefits here. And if you haven't done development, the benefit of working on something and not having to go back to it later on is enormous. There are many times when one specific problem can take up so much of your brain that if someone interrupts you, it might take you 10 or 20 minutes to get back into that problem. Many times the less experienced a developer is, the more time it will take them to go back in. So think about that. Let's say that you're working on feature 2 and a tester comes back in a later iteration and says, hey, on feature 1 there was a problem. The developer has to stop what they're doing, go back and look at this particular bug. They've got to completely shift what's in their brain and think into the code that they wrote whenever. And the farther you get away from that code, the harder it is to work with it. The farther in time you get away, the longer period of time it's been since then. That's a lot of time that you're wasting on both the new feature and on the old feature. What if we just fix the bugs while we're there? What if we fix the bugs as we're developing it? Now, this can be a lot of pressure on developers who haven't done this before, to see failing test cases before they've ever even written any code. Well, I understand that, but once we get over the fact that you haven't written any code yet, so of course it's going to fail, we'll be all right. And then secondly, we get past the point of, we have to get our teams and our people past the point of thinking that failing at these things and writing bugs is some type of personal issue. It's not. Every developer writes bugs, and every tester could if they could write code too. We all write bugs. The trick is, do we want to know about them or not? And I think if we're really invested in our product, if we want to make a better product, if we want to create a better working code, actual working code, then we want to know where those bugs are. It's in all of our best interests. So a defect that comes out or a bug that's shared with you is not a bad thing. It's actually a good thing. It's a piece of feedback that tells you what you can do to improve your code. And that's what we want to do with agile processes, is improve over time. So I think once the mindset starts to change to that shape, your team gets more mature and you can start actually working through things as opposed to other ways of doing things. But getting back to this, we started with testing the business logic layer, and I gave you an example of that. Maybe in the second part of this, we might use the same tests with a different mode, or we may actually kind of copy the tests and duplicate them in order to have a second different kind of test, which are ones that call into the business logic layer but verify that things happen right in the data model. You may have tests that go in and directly test the data model as well, and exercise the data model without the business logic layer. But at this point, once you have test cases that are verifying that the data model is there working as we expect, you now have something that's generally underappreciated. That is, you have two suites of tests. Each one tells you something different. The first suite that tests the business logic layer tells you if anything is wrong in the business logic layer. The second suite tells you if anything's wrong in the data model. This gives you a huge benefit that if something goes wrong, we know exactly where it is. If one of those test cases fails, we know where the problem is. And as nearly any developer will tell you, knowing where the problem is the larger part of solving a bug than others. The second biggest is probably being able to reproduce it. And we have a test case now that's reproducing that particular issue. And finally, one of the biggest benefits of approaching this way, aside from being able to sync up agile testing with development, is that you have the beginnings of a regression test. Consider that for a moment. Instead of sitting down and writing your regression tests all at one time, you're building it up as you go. Next, we can move out to the controller layer, whatever layer this might be for your application, and either write new test cases or use very similar ones to call into whatever the publicly exposed part of the controller is. At this point, we may want to verify things at the business logic layer and just know that we called into the business logic layer from the controller, or we may want to do something that for this situation is more end-to-end, from the end of the controller to the end of the data model. Verify that inputs into the controller give you outputs in the data model. Really, all we need for any testing is an input and an output. Finally, we're going to want to test the user interface. So we've worked our way from the inside of the application all the way to the outside of it. And at this point, you may want to continue using a test driver. Most of the teams that I work with do continue to use a test case driver. because they like it so much. There are so many benefits that come along with using this, from reporting and the fact that you have something that reports very clearly where your issues are, to the fact that you can share them across teams, the fact that you have something that's repeatable and a test case that's always repeated in the same way unless the code changes. Those are some huge benefits. The only difference in taking test cases that you wrote for the other layers of the application and using it here are the inputs. So at the user interface level, if you're going to use a test driver, you're probably going to want to tie into something like Selenium that will exercise your UI if it's a web UI or some other fixture code to tie into your UI if it's something else. You could also do manual testing at this point if you wanted to. One of the biggest benefits of approaching testing within your Agile environments this way is that you begin to leverage testers for more than pressing buttons. If testing was about pressing buttons, you wouldn't need to pay as much as you do for them. But in fact, most teams that I work with, that's what they're doing. The majority of their time is spent exercising the UI rather than thinking about what I can do with the application. What can I do to break it? What can I do to work with that application? Here are a few of the benefits, and I just talked through one of them. One of the things that I see a lot is more empowered testers, and testers get really psyched about this when they can access other parts of the application and know that something's working or not, whether there's a UI there or not. Being able to test these things early and often is hugely powerful. No, there's no waiting for the UI to come along. You don't have that latency of testers just sitting around and waiting. Everybody's functioning on all 6 cylinders all at the same time. Your troubleshooting gets easier from a developer perspective. Your persisted test case is something that you can go back and talk about, and look at, and critique, together. Your test cases are reusable. You have repeatable test cases. That's one of the greatest things about having computers do the work of testing, is that the computers love menial tasks, and generally people hate them. People will find ways to get around doing the same thing over and over again, even if they don't realize they're doing it. And that causes a certain amount of lack of credibility with testing, specifically with testing. Computers do it the same way every single time. Let's use computers for what they're good for and use humans for what they're good for as well. You have an audit log that's created by the reports that are generated automatically from most of these tools. You have early feedback on the application, and acceptance you can use these as acceptance tests as well. You also have faster tests generally because you're tying in at a lower level of the application, and you have to do less testing from the UI. Really, once you get to the UI level, you're testing to see that the UI works, not that the functionality underneath the UI is working. So let's take a break right here, and I'd love to hear other thoughts about this. So please feel free to raise your hand through the GoToWebinar control panel, and I will take you off of mute. If you can give us your name, where you work, and what your role is, it would be helpful to us for reasons of context. Any questions? We have a quiet group today. Okay, all right, well, let's move along. Are things getting better? This is the final part of this presentation that we want to go through, is how do we know when things are getting better? And I put together a list of these, and I'm not going to read them to you, but they're here. We'll go over a couple of them. A lot of these are non-intuitive. So things like estimates getting bigger, but wait, we want to get more work done, not less. The idea that less work gets done. Well, we want to do more work, not less. Well, remember what we were doing before. Remember that we were actually not working code until later in the process, that it might take us 2 iterations or 3 iterations or 4 to get to where we had working code. Well, what do we have then? How is more work getting done if less works? It's beyond me, and I see a lot of folks doing this out in the Agile world. We want working code at the end of every iteration. We want our features that we've set up, our stories that we've set up to work. So you will see this kind of non-intuitive idea that less tasks are getting done or less work is getting done. That's because we're actually accounting for the work that has to be done for those tasks. Instead of pretending like when dev is done, it's all there, we're actually going to do testing as well. And we're going to come out with automated tests that are repeatable and are part of our regression tests at the same time. Estimates get bigger because we're accounting for all the work once again. New awareness in the retrospective. So you start to see the touch points more clearly between people with specific roles. Now, on most agile teams, you're going to try to share roles anyway. So this is a good thing to start understanding what those different roles are and how we can work together to accomplish things as a team as we go through this. Finally, we're going to have working code at the demos. So you're bringing your product owner in, and they're seeing things actually working rather than a bunch of slides, documentation, and promises. Any other thoughts you have here about how you know if things are getting better? Great. Okay. So this is where we want to get, where each iteration teams are working together. We have working products coming out of those, as shown by the boxes here. Finally, iteration 3, you have a large portion of your application built and something that's working together. I think that understanding and sharing of roles and working together is what brings teams together and what makes people work together well. So, and friends. Finally, we've gone through several different things. We talked about you might have a problem if. We talked about from the inside out, which is one of several techniques for getting testing synced up with dev during your iterations. And we also talked about how to know when things are getting better. So finally, we're going to go through a couple other things. I said if there's one thing that you can take away from this, it's that syncing up testing is possible within your agile development. I hope you all walk away knowing that it is possible. I've seen it many times, and I've helped teams accomplish it numerous times. And you have a new technique called from the inside out. And this new technique is one that may take some juggling of resources. It may take bringing in some user resources or some help to walk through it a couple times together with a coach like we have here at Beaufort Fairmont, or some consulting at a managerial or Scrum Master level and how to make this work. We'd be happy to do that, or training in any of these tools or tying them in. We also work together with teams to actually come in and do some of that work. So if you need a specialist to do the technical work of tying in your test driver code to your application code, we can serve that purpose as well. But once again, if you walk away with anything, it's that this is possible. You have a new technique called From the Inside Out. And I also want you to know we're available for a free consultation anytime. I'm available for a free consultation. You may have to schedule it, but 30 minutes free consultation. And after that, usually teams want to work together on some smaller projects to get things going and to learn about each other and kind of get an intro. And one way that we do that is through a live workshop. And it's basically bring whoever you want from your organization. There's no preparation on my end except for the many years of experience I have doing this, and we'll sit down together and talk through your specific problems and challenges. And that I usually do about a 2-hour workshop, although that's flexible for $500. So it's a very good entry level kind of offering there, and it gives us a chance to really understand what's going on with your organization and what it is you need help on. Once again, the handout I have here, please make sure to download it. I'm not sure exactly how this works on GoToWebinar, but you should be able to see it in something like a handouts section in your control panel. It's called Syncing Up Testing-References.pdf, and it has this slide plus a few others in it, anything where I have a reference to it. I did quite a bit of research on this, and if you'd like more of my research, I'm happy to give it to you. Just reach out to me through email, paul@beaufortfairmont.com, which I'll also give you in the handout and in the last slide here. But I'm happy to give you more of my references that I used. I probably did, I probably did 10 to 15 hours of research, and that's on top of my experience. There are many ways to come out of an iteration with synced up testing and development. This is one of them, and there are some other there's some other ideas that are probably necessary to make this very helpful, and I can talk through that. Things like mocking out different components or simulating different components, and that's something that we can help you with anytime. Just reach out to us, and we'd love to talk about that. I think it'd be very interesting to you to talk through those techniques and have people right by your side working together with you on these. Finally, this is me, Paul Merrill. I'm Principal Software Engineer and Test and founder of Beaufort Fairmont. I have a podcast about software, engineering, and entrepreneurship. It's called Reflection as a Service, and it's in a link is in your handout as well. Please go out and listen to us. We just had a really good episode come online about with the founder of Out of Milk, which is an app in the App Store. It's the most downloaded app in the Google App Store. 27 million downloads. And this is the founder, and some of what he saw in developing that, what his entrepreneurial experience was with that, and so on. Very good interview with Chase Schaefer on that. We've got many others, including people who are very good within the Agile world. Corey Bryant is coming on very soon. He's given us an interview that was terrific about the product ownership role, and that should come out either the 1st of August or the 15th of August, although I'm still going through planning for the next couple months on Reflection as a Service and how we schedule everything out. But I believe it'll be next. You can read my writing on my blog. Our corporate blog is where I blog, beaufortfairmont.com/blog. Our website is beaufortfairmont.com. My email, paul@beaufortfairmont.com. Our phone number is 984-244-2313. My Twitter address is dpaulmerrill, and please make sure to like us on Facebook. Come visit us. Make sure that you reach out to us. Look, as you start learning these things, please reach out to me. I want to know what it is you're doing, what problems you're seeing, how you're getting through them, what are the challenges, what are the unique circumstances to your group. I want to know about it. Please reach out to me, whether it's just call me or send me an email, whatever it is. I'm very open to these kinds of things, and I want to talk about it. I want to learn from you. And if there's a way that I can help you out, something that I can say to help you out in a short time frame, I'm always open to that. But let's keep a relationship. These are several ways to do it. I'll be doing these webinars hopefully once a month if they continue to go well like they are now. Stay on our email list. We're going to be sending out more information about this and other opportunities for you to learn about automated testing, other factors that come in. Once again, in August, I'll have the more technical version of this talk. So send your developers and your highly technical people over. If you're one of those, please join us again for it. Sign up as soon as it comes out. Look out for the email for that. If you, for some reason, unsubscribe to the email and you want to keep getting it, send me a note and I'll be happy to add you on there. I really appreciate all of your time, all the great questions and comments and concerns, all of your challenges. And let's just keep this going. Let's build a relationship here. You can look out also on LinkedIn. I have a few questions out there that I've answered on Quora. Those are other ways to get in touch with me and to ask questions and things. I try to stay active on those things when possible. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope you have a wonderful Monday.